Hello again and welcome to an Infinity the Game tournament report. This is going to be a series of 3 videos in which I'll cover the games I played at a recent event in Canberra, Australia called CantCon. Now if that sounds familiar, under normal circumstances about this time each year in Australia we would be running a convention called CanCon, and indeed CanCon is running almost as I record this in point of fact. But the tournament organisers for Infinity kind of made the decision that we weren't quite willing to subject everyone to that human petri dish at the moment. Not willing to go full doorknob liquor at this stage. Basically, COVID is still going pretty rampant in Australia right now. It's ripping off a little bit. So we ran an event, but we ran it off-site. The event had, I think, 16 players. It was run at a community hall, actually a really nice venue. Pizza over lunch, etc., etc. Fantastic job done by Chris Johnson, the tournament organizer, if you are an Australian listening to this and have seen his photos posted in the Infinity Australia page. But without further ado, let's jump into my army and the first scenario. So for this event, I decided to play Combined Army, and you can see the first of my 2 lists on screen there. This is the list I played in Scenario 1. Now, I was considering playing and trying to build and test Toha lists for this event, but it sort of didn't come together at the 11th hour, and so I defaulted back to tried, tested, and comfortable Combined Army. You'll probably see some Toha content as I use some of what I'd been working on ahead of the event in games and battle reports, but for now, this is Combined Army. I know them well, they're comfortable, and what's more, they were a better fit for the scenario. Not only that, but I also suspect they were a better fit for the meta. And by that, what I mean is, this being a local event, I know a lot of the players that are attending. We did have actually a number of players from interstate, which was awesome. But what I expected to have to play against included a really good Spiral Core player with a nearly immaculate deployment zone defense, at least one Combined Army player who's not afraid to run an Avatar, and then also 1 or even 2 Yuqing players with extremely aggressive Sujan play. And that last one in particular, I didn't have confidence that I could beat that with Toha without getting lucky. The fact that the Sujan is both very fast, can be supported by really good MSV smoke shooting if the Yuqing player wants in the form of a Sen warrior, and it has structure. Makes it really difficult for Toha asymmetric defenses to stop it. You have to trade, basically, and you often have to trade quite a lot with the Sujan in order to stop it. And thanks to the fact that it has both remote presence and no wound incapacitation, you really can't guarantee on your flamethrower stopping it dead before it wreaks havoc with your list. I've had 1 game against that recently, and I got very, very, very lucky. Literally a dodging McCall won a face-to-face roll out of cover against a burst 3 heavy shotgun to dodge into CC and basically save the game for me. And under other circumstances, I didn't expect that to win. So what I'm getting at here basically is I wanted something that could deal with those pieces as well as play scenario in this event. And the first scenario was Frostbyte. And if you're a Toha player, you'll know heavy infantry and tags are not Toha forte, whereas with Combined Army, we've got very good heavy infantry and very good tags. So this is the first of the 2 lists that I played. This one is the more experimental of the 2. The second is one that will be familiar to people who've seen this channel. But it was trying to basically build a list that was different to my usual Charontid, Raicho, Umbra list without using the Avatar. I specifically set myself the challenge of not playing the Avatar at this event, even though the Avatar is really, really, really good, because I don't enjoy games with the Avatar, playing as or against it. It's an extremely powerful piece, exceptionally powerful, probably the most powerful individual piece in the game. It is costed as such, although frankly I think it's probably about 5% overtuned even at that price. But games with the Avatar are stressful. When you're playing against the Avatar, it's stressful because you're playing against the Avatar and it's incredibly powerful. But when you're playing with the Avatar, or at least when I'm playing with the Avatar, I still find the game stressful, because the Avatar represents a single massive point of failure, and if it dies, you can have done enough damage, actually. The Avatar games are more recoverable than they have ever been in the case of loss of the Avatar in N4, but you're still really, really up against it if the Avatar dies. So what I've kind of found is that nobody has any chill in a game where the Avatar is on the table. So I wanted to play something that didn't have an Avatar. And this is what I came up with. This is a bit of a callback to a list that I tried in N3, with the idea of being kind of build your own Mnemonica Lieutenant. And so of course it's got Sheshkin as the LT, but it has a non-lieutenant anathematic with Sepsitor, which can be a really cool clutch piece. that you can kind of attack aggressively with, and if it dies, then you Mnemonica into either Sheshkin, well, you can Mnemonica into a hacker to have a Whip 16 hacker, but ideally you Mnemonica into Sheshkin so that you now have a Mnemonica lieutenant, because she gains that rule, and if she dies, the Mnemonica rule and the lieutenant rule will transfer out into your next trooper, basically making you immune to loss of lieutenant. Not that combined armies suffer terribly in loss of lieutenant, in any case, thanks to Imatrons and Atarazi being veterans. So I have not played this list at all in N4. There are a lot of flex points that could change about it. I don't actually think it's particularly great, but it is pretty fun. You could change the Noctifer out for a Speculo killer, and you can also just totally cut the guided missile package very easily. You can cut the Mentor hacker, and you can cut the T-drone, and that can afford something like, for example, a Rassiat Spitfire, which frankly probably really good. I just wanted to try this, and I did feel like I needed the one extra specialist in case I had to play this list or wanted to play this list in Frostbyte. And indeed, Frostbyte was the first scenario, and I kind of just selected this list because I felt like it. My opponent was playing StarCo, and we'll get to their list in a second, but I was a little bit concerned about my other list against StarCo, mostly lower Fizz Lieutenant, and although my second list has a Raicho, which is probably the least vulnerable tag in the game to spec-fired electromagnetic grenades, I still didn't really want to play into that. If I could avoid it, I would rather have had a list that could go to ground, avoid this worst of the casualties from the spec-fire, and then counterpunch or trap my opponent. And so obviously I have a very vulnerable asset in the form of the Anathematic to electromagnetic spec-fire, but it's in hidden deployment at the start of the game, and indeed it can safely hidden deploy because it's not my lieutenant. So with that said, this is my opponent's list. This is really probably one of the best, if not the best, StarCo list I've seen in N4. If anyone is interested in playing and picking up StarCo, I strongly suggest starting with this. Really the only change that I would make to this, if I felt like making a change, is that you could cut a Zond bot, I think, to make the Alguacil forward observer into a hacker. And another hacker in this list wouldn't hurt. It's running under SWC, although only a little bit, but the presence of a second hacker would make Uhahu's pitches potentially just a little more useful. But you can see the list on screen in front of you there, and obviously it's built around a core of Alguaciles combining Emily with X-Visor, EM grenades, ballistic skill 13, and the Mobile Brigada missile launcher as a hard aero piece. Now, under ideal circumstances, you wouldn't necessarily, like, you're splitting the link's purpose there, and it does mean that if there is a hidden deployment element, for example, and the Brigada is on Overwatch, then spec firing with the link can expose you to fire. But I think that's probably worthwhile because you get still the best, you get everything. You get your Mobile Brigada, excellent defensive ARO piece, and you get your spec fire, and the link can very happily sit statically, basically wherever it wants, and contribute to the game that way without putting itself at risk. And then the rest of the list can play around it. We have a Riot Girl Haris with Uhahu, a multi-rifle Riot Girl, and a Tinbot Riot Girl. I really like this as well. Ideally, you would probably have a Spitfire in that link team, but obviously there is no SWC for it, and I honestly don't mind it as it is. There's a possible argument that this is the better composition for the Riot Girl team. You don't have the Spitfire's range bands, but there is nothing wrong with a Riot Girl multi-rifle with burst bonus, and she has AP. That is a damage 14 armor-piercing weapon, or damage 14 shock weapon, that still has range bands that the team wants to operate in, and she's a 6-2 move piece. And she's much cheaper. She's SWC cheaper and points cheaper than the Spitfire. And you can afford, you don't then have to scrimp SWC elsewhere. You get all of the other guns and pieces that you want, as well as the cheap Alguacil Lieutenant. The only way to find extra points in this list would be to exchange the Alguacil Lieutenant for something that doesn't cost SWC, and that's an expensive proposition. So honestly, I think this is really good. And the list is not wanting for firepower otherwise, although it's kind of like a just enough firepower. Obviously, Uhahu is a hacker, and she has pitches, and the Riot Girl with boarding shotgun contributes to short range, and the firewall means that Uhahu is a really frustrating hacker to engage. So I love this as a mobile link team. Then there is a Dactari with 2 Zonbots. You can roll Dactaris into the core link, I believe, in StarCo, but this means you have Zonbots instead. And I think totally viable because most of the time the things you'll be doctoring are split across the board. In particular, you will often be doctoring the Riot Girls, you'll often be doctoring the Brigada, and you'll often be doctoring Nauf in Group 2. Nauf I love in this list. He's where the remainder of the SWC go, and although he doesn't have a cube, so doctoring him is tricky, he's just, as a self-contained piece, really good. He can, but usually shouldn't go on ARO duty, but as an active firepower piece, he's excellently suited to those few orders in the second combat group, supporting the rest of the link. Nauf's just really, really solid, and not too expensive. You have to not overestimate what he can do. He's only a 32-point piece, but at the cost, fantastic. There's also the excellent Hardcase Frontiersman. There's a Jaguar, a Transductor Zond, and then there's Raoul Spectre Combat Jump. It is easy to overlook Spectre's presence in this list. My opponent is pretty disciplined with bringing him down, but there's sort of already so much on the table that unless you're paying attention, you might miss that Spectre is coming. And Spectre is excellent. He doesn't have Deployment Zone Parachutist, but he's a reasonable combat jumper at Phys 13, and he can walk in off the sides, and if he can make it into combat, then he's excellent in close combat, has drop bears, close range assault, mimetism, etc. So really good piece. So this is the table that we're playing on. Sort of you can see left to right there. My opponent's deployment zone is on the left, and my deployment zone is on the right. Now, in this instance, I don't actually remember who won the role for Lieutenant. I suspect I may have and picked zones, and my opponent elected to go first. We're playing Frostbyte, so you can see there's this line of heaters up the board there, and then there are, of course, the objectives down the center there. I picked this side because the objectives were much easier to access, and also because I wasn't really sure if either side had favorable terrain to deploy in, but I wanted to be able to hunker down, and the sort of like the rear positions of this table of that side felt quite vulnerable. In particular, they felt quite vulnerable to Raoul Spectre landing and hitting me. Whereas on the right side of the table, I could have... So the table does actually extend all the way to the edge of the table here. These tiles don't fully occupy 48 inches. I have a guided missile remote back there watching sort of the entire, like this entire part of the board, which makes deployment zone defense against Spectre. You can easily miss him with a missile launcher, but it made deployment zone defense feel a little more comfortable. So my opponent has deployed his big core on this rooftop here. Now you can see that they're not quite all the way up to the 12-inch, like the 12-inch line stops there. So they'll have some movement to do, which is why everything is deployed prone. But then they're otherwise all on the rooftop, or there's like a couple of them nooked around back here, and there's a Dactari bot up there as well. So this will be a strong point for most of the game. There's camouflage markers in the midfield around, so in the exclusions, not in the exclusion zone around here. Nauf, as his reserve drop, has deployed in this space up here. And then we have the free motorized bounty hunter who has rolled up I think he chose the Red Fury profile and then rolled up a multi-sniper rifle, deployed here, and this photograph was taken in the middle of its impetuous move. For my part, I've kind of hunkered everything down, but the Noctifer is on this building, on this, you can actually see it in this photo, it's on this big crate there. That line of fire is not as good as I would like, to be honest. And the big problem with it is that it cannot actually see the rooftop over here. The bridge there is just positioned that it blocks that specific bit of line of fire. I can see under it really, really easily. I can see over it, but I can't see that rooftop. And that's actually something that I just didn't notice when picking deployment zones. Otherwise, the table is really kind of open. To the point, I do not love how this table has been set up, to be perfectly honest. It's by no means the worst tournament event table I've played on, not even close. But it forces movement in ways that I don't particularly like. There are only 2 routes up the table that don't cross high ground, and those routes are very, very visible to most of the deployment zone. This table has formed kind of what I would call a valley formation. It's not the worst that I've seen. There are places to hide and nook in, etc. But valley tables occur when the person who builds the table puts most of the high ground in the deployment zones. And what that will natively mean is that the deployment zones can both see each other and see all of the table, which means movement, like movement up onto the board, into the table to play the game, is pretty much entirely contingent on having a way to move past your opponent's Overwatch or engage it. And if that's the case, the game becomes binary very quickly. Particularly if you're playing, say, Pan-Oceania versus Pan-Oceania, a game on a valley table is a firefight in the first turn and then often just kind of resolved. And there's not a lot of room for actual play on that kind of an environment. And we had a little bit of that here. And in particular, I think the big offender, and maybe I should have noticed this and just picked this deployment zone as a result, notwithstanding my sort of fear of Spectre and desire to hunker down, is that from this deployment position here, Nauf can literally see the entire board, sometimes having to move very slightly left and right, but he has coverage of everything. For my part, if I'd been playing an avatar list, and I had just gotten the avatar up onto this building here, I would have literally been able to see my opponent's entire deployment zone. And that's immediately just brings the game to almost a solved state. Now, I was playing a short-range list, so this screwed me. And which is part of probably why I'm complaining. I should have bought a list with bigger guns. But I made that choice and I had to live with it. But yeah, just a bit of commentary. And that table formation actually would dominate much of the game. So the very first thing that happens is that this biker, Impetuous, is around. And specifically because my Noctifer can't see his core link anyway, I don't feel like I have to hold the Noctifer to wait for his core link to stand and move. Because it's not going to do anything. I'm not going to be able to trap his core link and get that perfect shot that hits multiple things. So I just reveal the Noctifer, and I shoot the bike while it's there. Great circle, Rob. And it just blows away both the bike and the repeater remote, which is a good result, right? So immediately I've killed 22 points of models, knocked out an order for the rest of the game for my opponent. Fantastic. What's not so good is the fact that Nauf then just dismounts his high position here and moves out into the open. He takes a shot through the saturation zone. These circles, by the way, are the blizzard zones in Frostbyte, and wipes the Noctifer in one go. Now, he had to move into the open, so this was a 2 dice on 10s versus 1 dice on 12s face-to-face roll. If I'd won that roll, that's the game locked up, like immediately, because he doesn't really have anything. Right? His Riot Girl Harries is all deployed over here. They don't have an easy way of advancing up past the Noctifer. And his missile launcher can't see me because that bridge is in the way. And even if it did, it wouldn't necessarily want to take that fight because there's saturation zones in the way. So it's 1 dice to 1 dice, 12s to 10s. Bad for him. If I'd won that face-to-face roll, the game is done. It's just done immediately. That's why I don't like this kind of table setup, even if it would favor me. However, Nauf, not Nauf honestly favored to win that face-to-face roll. And the fact that Nauf has double action shock ammunition makes him a perfect target for engaging the Noctifer. So he just stitches the Noctifer up immediately. Which is fine. So the Noctifer is dead. And that's my longest range gun gone with this silly experimental list. But we will do what we can. Nauf will continue to be a thorn in my side for much of the game. And this has been a real showcase of how if you just use him conservatively, you pick your fights with him, you don't leave him up as an over ARO piece until you're confident that you can. He's great. Really good use of the second order group as well, where he just spends it as he needs it. The rest of my opponent's turn is spent getting this Riot Girl Harries up here, moving up there. And the Libertos is deployed prone behind this this box here. And basically he is looking to go, so with his ITS biker dead, the next easiest specialist for him to press a button is Uhaho. And so he's looking to move up there to take this objective. He kind of pauses briefly at this point, sort of to think about what he wants to do with his order pool. And he does move, before he does anything else, he does move the core link up. So the Brigada will end up sort of in this position here for the rest of the game, and I will spend much of the time avoiding it. But then he also gets Emily up in this little nook here, which is kind of an ideal position. He then spends a couple of orders on Specfire, and in particular, he wipes out Bit on the first shot, who is hunkered down in here. Emily needs a 13, Bit needs a 7 to dodge. Blam, takes her out with a regular grenade. There is a Taiga in that building as well. The Taiga does successfully dodge, and will be a bit of a thorn in the side for the rest of the game. I think it suicides into something in the end. He moves the Riot Girl team up, but he doesn't actually push up that far, mostly sort of out of concern of what might happen if he does so. A lot of the rest of this turn he spends actually kind of perhaps unwisely spec-firing Taiga creatures. He does take one shot with an EM grenade at Sheshkin, who is back here, but the range there is far enough that he's in the -6 down to -3 for X-Visor band. And so he needs 10s he needs 7s on that shot to my 12s. He could have just tried to force that out, actually, and put me in the lieutenant for a turn, which would have really sucked. But he sort of had one go at that and then decided he would actually rather roll 13s and go up against... He wanted to avoid Taiga creatures suiciding into his pieces. So he spends a fair bit of the turn. He puts the Riot Girls in like good defensive positions, kind of there and there, settles them in to push next turn, and just sort of spec fires. I think he kills one Taiga creature, and that's kind of it for the first turn. So he's taken out, if you think about it, with a diminished order pool, he's taken out the Noctifer bit, and I think one of my 2 Taiga creatures, and has otherwise kept himself in a defensive position so that attacking into me will be difficult. In particular, Nauf is alive and standing, and he has reasonable confidence that there can be no big long-range guns left, because anything hidden that I have won't be long-range. So I have to then begin my first turn into this. I do a little bit of impetuous movement, just where it's safe to do so, and then I try and figure out what I want to accomplish with my first turn. And I decided that if I don't want to reveal the anathematic. Ideally, and the anathematic, by the way, is deployed prone behind this this truck with a line kind of down, not quite like that, but it's a line down there. And what I would love to do is for him to push up and get Sepsitored, or better, for him to try and land Ral Spectre somewhere that he thinks is safe, and then get Sepsitored in ARO. Now, it's not going to happen, but failing that, using the anathematic as a pseudo Noctifer with a plasma ARO is perfectly serviceable. So that's plan B. I kind of don't want to reveal it. So what I do with this turn is I lay down a little bit of smoke to protect the bounty hunter biker here. There's a Datarazi down there that does that. So I lay down some smoke to enable the bounty hunter biker to move up here. And then it has to dismount and drop prone because Nauf can see down into this alleyway if the target is standing. But basically the bounty hunter just moves up there and it presses the button. And so it turns on my heater and then it just chills the hell out. I would like to have orders to put it in suppressive fire, but I don't, not the end of the world. It drops into cover, drops prone, and its job is done for now. Otherwise, because I don't want to push aggressively into my opponent, I just attack with Libertos and Tigers. And the Libertos manages to get up and around here, and there's a Riot Girl boarding shotgun back there, and it comes around the corner, takes her out of cover, and it's got some machine gun, and it just goes burp, 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 and it drops her unconscious, which is fantastic. And it dies because, like, things and stuff overwatching it. But that's still pretty okay. Otherwise, at this point, I've got Sheshkin's Snow Ops and Lieutenant order, and I just use her Snow Ops order to do a little bit of reshuffling. So this is the Mentor hacker back here. It moves up to occupy the position the Libertos was in, and Sheshkin moves up to occupy the position the Mentor was in, just to sort of stage a little bit. She can do that just barely. This crate is blocking Nauf's line of fire to her from where Nauf is currently positioned, and that sort of has to do. It's not a good first turn. I'd like a big counterattack, but I don't and can't have one, so that'll have to do. The good news is I put my opponent under scenario pressure. He doesn't have any buttons pressed, he does not have his heater activated, and he's only got kind of like 1.5 specialists that can do it. Hahu and the Daktari. So the first thing he does with his turn is he basically repairs some of the damage that I did. So there's a Doctor Bot that sort of comes all the way up here, and it will repair, it'll heal the boarding shotgun Riot Girl, and he'll reform that link. And then much of the rest of the turn is spent moving that link forward, ready to push onto this objective. And at this point, I have to reveal the anathematic. So it reveals and it fires a plasma template that splashes all of them. And it hits, and the Riot Girl multi-rifle dodges, and the Riot Girl shotgun dodges, and Oahu fails the dodge and dies. Which is really, really good, because it means that he does not have a button pressed. And he is way out of position to get one pressed. He pushes the remaining that he reforms, doesn't reform them into a duo, he just attacks. He pushes forward and takes some shots, but doesn't have to get anything. And basically on like the last order of the turn, he reverts back to Emily, and he just spec fires. And an EM grenade nails the fucking anathematic, and it fails its BTS rolls. And it gets isolated and immobilized. And that's why I didn't want to reveal it, except in dire circumstances, but needs must. So I end my opponent's second turn with his Riot Girls in position, ready to like mess me up, but not linked, and with the anathematic revealed, but isolated and immobilized. We need to get pretty creative at this point. And because there's a whole lot of MSV1 and I have no white noise. What we do is, this Datarazi, there's a Datarazi knocked in behind here, it impetuouses around this way, dies horribly, and throws non-face-to-face smoke down in this area to cover the anathematic. The anathematic can be seen by the Riot Girls, and I'd like to sort of open the way for it if I can, but that smoke is still effective against MSV1 if I'm not face-to-face, if I'm not making ballistic skill attacks. At that point, Sheshkin makes a fucking run for it. And she has a nano screen, and that smoke in the way imposes a net -9 plus range, so -6 on most of the shooting against her. And she gets into close combat with the Riot Girl boarding shotgun, who templates her, now shoots her, the multi-rifle shoots her, and she slaps a decharge onto the Riot Girl. After the dust settles, she's gained, I think she's lost 3 wounds from the combination of template, Nauf, and Riot Girl multi-rifle, but she gained 3 from the cooked meat of the decharge on the Riot Girl boarding shotgun. And she guts us down, sort of in behind here. I think she then like makes a run. So I kill the multi-rifle as well, and I think I do it the same way. And she ends up prone behind here. And basically gaining wounds, losing wounds, gaining wounds, losing wounds, and with the smoke, the -6 from the smoke keeping her from dying. So I Taiga contributes as well, basically. And then I activate the anathematic with its only order, and I roll to reset, and it rolls a 4. Which with -12 is a success, just. So it's back online. I have my last order on it spent to the last order, I think, in the combat group, spent to recamouflage. Oh, the bike is dead, by the way. Now I've deleted it in one order in the previous turn. So what I end up with at the end of my turn is I'm running out of Taiga creatures, I'm running out of resources, I've lost the Noctifer. Sheshkin is, the mentor died in the last turn to a boarding shotgun. But Sheshkin is prone here behind this Nook, and the anathematic is prone here out of a marker state. Sorry, out of isolated mobilized and out of in a marker state. And there's nothing nearby, nothing close enough, that can be targeted with an EM grenade that would also clip the anathematic. So it is safe. My opponent at this point, going into his third turn, still has not pressed a button. And he makes the play to land Rail Spectre, finally. Rail Spectre drops down here. Everything that might have been watching is either moved up into the midfield or dead. And basically, if he succeeds this, I'm probably in trouble. But he doesn't. He fails this is the second bit of really significant luck for me this game. He fails the roll, and Spectre walks on there. The rest of the turn for him is basically going to be spent. Spectre's moved into the first combat group, moving up here, and taking, I think, 3 orders to press this button. So that gets this heating element turned on, and that's about all he can do. A hard case, using all of the second combat group's orders, makes a run for it up here, engages Sheshkin, who she just dodges. And he makes hit mode attacks, and she just sort of survives, and that's all of the orders that he's got. So at this point, it's my last turn and I have to make a decision about what to do. And I have a few things that have to be done first. And from there, we'll see. So the very first thing that happens is that Sheshkin runs into CC with the hard case. There's no smoke this time. Now flights are up. Does one wound to her. I think he does 2 wounds to her again. But she does 2 wounds to the hard case. No, he does between Nauf and the hard case's shotgun. She takes 2 wounds. And from her Protheon, she gains 2 wounds using her last decharge. So she's still on full health. And then she activates. And she steps up here. And she takes a 24-inch face-to-face roll with Nauf. And she loses and takes a wound. And that's pretty bad. She sort of so what she does, specifically the execution there, is she steps up onto this and then back, so that when she fails the face-to-face roll, so when she loses the face-to-face roll and she fails her gut, she can go prone. So I can figure out what to do with her. At this point, I activate the anathematic and I move forward. And he takes a discover with Nauf. And I shoot him in response. And I whiff. Which, you know, it's more than 16 inches. I need 4s on that. I'm not salty about that at all. So I'm like, all right, well, I have to risk this with Sheshkin again. I just have to. So she steps up again, and this time she wins the face-to-face roll. She's on 12s, now she's on 13. She has 4 dice, he has 1. And she puts him in the ground. From here, she moves around this way and onto this objective. Actually, she moves around this way and into base contact with an unconscious Palbot. And that is where she will sit for the rest of the game, because she's doing a classified. She's doing a capture. She's a veteran troop, thanks to being a character. And she's in contact with an enemy trooper, who is in an unconscious state, in a null state. I've also done Predator. And I have secured the HVT left to do. Now is down, but the Brigada is still standing. And I move the anathematic up into the midfield. Now, at this point, I make a mistake. And it's a mistake that will cost me tournament points. It's a result of a very classic bias. I overestimate my losses and underestimate my opponents. I think what I have suffered is worse than what my opponent has suffered. Now, if I stop and think here, I've killed Nauf, I've killed 2 Riot Girls and Emily, I've killed a hard case, I've killed a biker, and I've killed a Flash Pulse remote. And I've lost a Noctifer, a Dadarazi, 2 Taiga creatures, a Libertos, and a Mentor. And a biker. I actually have more stuff on the table than my opponent right now by something like 30 points. But I don't think I have. I think I'm a little bit behind. However, I also know that no matter what happens, I'm now winning the scenario. Because I've got 3 points on classifieds, secure the HVT, capture, and Predator. And my opponent, and actually I think I've done 2 Predator kills, or at the time I thought I had done 2 Predator kills. So it's Predator just for the 1 point. And my opponent, and I'm comfortably dominating the exclusion zone. Not only that, but Raoul Spectre over here is not a heavy infantry and he'll die at the end of the turn. I don't factor that in either. My opponent, at most, has 3 points from army points killed. But I think he's got that. He actually doesn't. Right now, the score is 10-0. I should have stopped playing. All I can do is make things worse for myself. Even if I kill more army points, that doesn't get me any more tournament points, doesn't get me any more objective points, and it just loses me future tiebreakers. Because I think I am behind, because I have fallen victim to an unconscious bias where I think my losses are worse than they are and my opponents are lighter than they are, I move the anathematic up to here, and I engage the missile launcher at 16 inches through the saturation zone. Now this is not a bad face-to-face roll. I am 2 dice on 13s, and he is 1 dice on 7s. The problem is, there is nothing beneficial to be gained from this. My plan is to take the face-to-face roll until either the Brigada is dead or I suffer any wounds. Because if I suffer any wounds, then gigs up. At that point, I'm at risk of a missile launcher crit or hit. It's not worth keeping on making the fight. I'll take my 7-point win and my army points and be done with it. Unfortunately, the first face-to-face roll is totally inconclusive, and in the second face-to-face roll, my opponent crits on a 7, and I need to roll 10s to pass my save, so 55% chance per dice, and I fail 3 of them, and the anathematic goes straight to dead. I was not previously behind on army points. I am now. But I have a plan, which is to stop there. And so I'm like, all right, cool. Well, we're done. We're finished. I will see if I can get one more objective point. And so what we do with the remaining orders in the first group, the Datarazi that has been hanging out down here the entire game moves up this way under cover of smoke, dodges out of the smoke, and berserks Rail Spectre. And it kills him, which gets me what I think at the time and how we scored is my 3rd Predator kill, which is an extra 1 point. And so the game ends 7 points to me, 3 points to my opponent, which is 7 points for a win is still maximum tournament points. So I'm happy with that as an outcome, but this is a very good example of how unconscious bias can cause you to make plays that only have bad outcomes. This means I'm not, there's at least one other player who has gone 10-zip in their first round, and that's the Spiral opponent that I basically accounted for in my list choice. So he's at top table right now. There is also an undefeated Avatar player. I believe there is an undefeated Yuqing Sujan player. And then there's me, and there are a bunch of other players as well. With 16 players, we have 8 undefeateds at this point. There's an undefeated Nomad player who came up from Melbourne, and an undefeated Ariadnan player, who I will end up playing in round 2, which is to come. So stay tuned for the next one. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please leave a comment if there's anything else that you'd like to see or any questions that you have. In future rounds, this was easily the scrubbiest, sort of like most difficult game where I had to rely on dice to bail me out. But dice did bail me out, particularly the anathematic reset on a 4 saved the game. Ironically, if it had never reset, Sheshkin could still have done almost everything that she did and would have ended up in exactly the same place. And I might have actually won a more significant victory. I wouldn't have gotten Predator, and I wouldn't have gotten the bonus points on... I wouldn't have gotten the bonus point on Predator, and I wouldn't have gotten Secure the HVT. But it would actually probably have been, when we'd done the math, it would have been like an 8-point win, or a 9-point... It would have been a 9-point win rather than a 7-point win. But that's neither here nor there. So all in all, felt like I had to get lucky to win, and did. Some questionable decisions. But this was a good game to brush the rust off. My opponent was very good. This is an excellent demonstration of how StarCo can play. So if you're interested in StarCo, really I'll just tab back to the list and leave it up on screen. I really like this as a StarCo list. It's a little bit of tinkering that you could do, but if you wanted to play StarCo and start, this is where I would go. This is what I would begin with. You can flex out from there, try different things. This is just a wonderful starting point. So yeah, hope you enjoyed this, and stay tuned for the next one.